Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frata Eleftheria, and in today's video I'm going to continue what I've been doing the last several weeks, and that is to give you some snippets into the kinds of teachings that were communicated to me during my various angelic scrying sessions over the years, which I have collated into a book, the Voces Caelesti, or Book of Heavenly Voices, which I plan to release in the coming weeks. Although the book is still to be published, I'm starting the gradual revealing of some of the key messages of that book. And that process really began at the end of March when I announced the book. This will be a continuation of that, and if you want to find out when that book is going to be published and other things that I plan on doing and making sure that information gets to you and isn't gate-kept by the YouTube algorithm, I strongly encourage you to join my mailing list. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. And also another thing I want to plug quickly before I get on to the topic of tonight is an interview that I did recently with Michael Phillips from Third Eye Drops. It was a fantastic conversation, and by the time I publish this video, that interview should also be up as well. So I'll leave a link in the description below to that as well. Now, on to tonight's topic. As you've probably gathered from the thumbnail, tonight's topic is the Demiurge, the sort of false imposter god that is spoken of in the Gnostic literature. But tonight's discussion on the Demiurge is going to be different to the traditional discussion. That's because it concerns information which paints the myth of the Demiurge in a very different light and has very different implications for how we see the history of world religion and how we consider the difference between true religion and false religion. So that's what I'm going to share tonight, because I received a number of downloads from various angels through the years, which gave me an account of the Demiurge and what the Demiurge represents, which had some similarities to the Gnostic narrative, but in other respects deviated significantly from it and revealed a new level of truth and understanding for that story. So the downloads that I got about this topic actually started when I hadn't been using magic for that long, although my holy guardian angel would later take credit for them when I was doing Liber Samek, and then working with the angel, the holy guardian angel, in some different magical operations after that. This is not surprising when you consider the fact that the holy guardian angel is one's higher divine genius. But I was going through my old magical diaries recently when I first started to record the key ideas that formed part of this communication. And they seem to have come on shortly after I had been messing with the Enochian calls. It was one of the first times I had seriously engaged with the Enochian material. So that's just an interesting thing to note, given what else I would use Enochian magic for in the future. So anyway, I had a certain amount of core information on the teachings on the Demiurge, a new teaching on the Demiurge. And the Holy Guardian Angel eventually told me I would need to do other angelic workings in the future to get more information that would flesh out this topic even further. And I did do that during the Jebaphil ritual. There are a few little communications that I scried which concerned this topic, but the bulk of the received information that I got on this topic came as a result of me working with the angels of the Heptarchia in Enochian magic, specifically the king, prince, and ministers of the moon, which can give information concerning the kings of the world, both spiritual and material, and can reveal their secrets. So after I had done that operation, I had everything that I needed to communicate this teaching on the Demiurge. So what is it exactly that the angels told me? The first thing they told me is that the Gnostic theology is, at a basic level, essentially correct. That is to say, there is the true God, who is the ineffable divine, beyond description, infinite and eternal and one, but greater and different to anything that we can imagine with our puny human brains. And then, in contrast to the true divinity, the true God, there is also a false God, an imposter God, a demiurge. And this demiurge is the distorted, imperfect reflection of the true God. And he does indeed oppress the human race by keeping us ignorant of our divine nature, keeping us trapped in a prison reality of sorts. And it is indeed the case that many in the world who believe they are worshipping the true God are in fact worshipping the demiurge instead. So those are the similarities between Gnosticism and what the angels taught me. But here's where the teachings diverge. In the Gnostic account, the demiurge is a creator god in the proper sense. The demiurge is a lesser deity who creates the physical world, and we are his creation. Or at least the material bodies that contain our divine spark are his creation. But here is the bombshell that was revealed to me. It's the other way around. It is we humans who created the demiurge. We are the creators and he is the creation. He told us that he comes from heaven and he made us from the clay of the earth. But that's precisely the opposite. He's flipped the script. He has exchanged places with us by making us believe that, because in actual fact, we are the ones whose inheritance is heaven. And we created images of clay to represent divinity. And those images are of something that our mind has fabricated, that we have created. And that is the origin of the demiurge. The demiurge is the false god of our creation. He is the graven image of God. And that is the source of his imperfection. And the angels, for the most part, they didn't call the demiurge by that name. They applied a different name to him. They called him the idol. The demiurge, who has oppressed humanity down through the centuries, who is a pretender to the status of supreme God, who has obscured our own divinity, is none other than the God that we invented. You see, when the atheists said that God is nothing more than an absurd character that was merely made up by deranged human minds, they had a point, but the thing is they only got halfway to the truth, because they made that assertion and then they said that is the only God that exists. It is this ridiculous man-made invention. Whereas the rest of the truth is that there is a true divinity, which is ineffable, unknowable, the absolute, the transcendent, the eternal. And it is in our botched attempt as ignorant human beings to describe that true divinity that we have brought the idol into being. It is we who are the Sophia. The Sophia represents the human consciousness in much the same way as Christ does. But Sophia is the feminine polarity, the feminine manifestation of that principle of consciousness, and Christ is the male manifestation of it. But they're both pointing to the same thing. And so when the Sophia in the Gnostic myth gives birth to the demiurge, that represents our own consciousness, our own creative power, creating this image of God, and then mistaking that for the truth. And so what the demiurge really is, what the idol truly is not a god at all, really, but a thought form, a tulpa that has been created by some dark priesthood sometime in the distant past. And if you don't know what a tulpa is, I'm sure many people do, because the idea seems to have permeated popular culture by now. But there was this idea in the Tibetan religion that very powerful monks or priests could imagine a character that is just an imaginary being that doesn't actually exist. But if they pour their belief and their will into this made-up character, it would become real. It would become a real being made from human thought. Another name for it, or an analogous concept, might be a thought form, or perhaps an egregore. And what would happen with these tulpas quite often is that the priests would lose control of it, and it would begin to menace the general population and terrorize the general population. And so when that happened, it was necessary for them to dissolve or destroy the tulpa in order to spare the community. But what happened with the tulpa, who is the idol, is that we never destroyed the thought form. We continued to feed it. We continued to give it our belief and our faith, and it continued to grow, and it became more and more powerful over the centuries and the millennia, and it has become a true tyrant over the human race in that time. And it has given rise to entire forms of religion. It has created the scaffolding for entire empires of oppression that have kept humanity down through the centuries. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that as this video continues. But before I do that, I want to just go back to something I said before about the tulpas and the fact that even though they terrorized the community, there was a way of stopping them, of dissolving the thought forms back into nothing. And so I think the key takeaway from that is this false god that we have worshipped as the true God, this idol, is not this cosmic being of immeasurable power that we're helpless in the face of as it keeps us enslaved. But it is a nothing. It is really a non-entity which amounts to nothing without the belief that we give to it. And so it is not unlike one of the gods in the American Gods series by Neil Gaiman. So the big takeaway is this false idea of God that we have is the God of our own creation. And what human beings can create, human beings can also destroy. At a deep, unconscious level, we know that there's something wrong with the way that we understand God. We know that in some sense we are being controlled by religion, that something isn't right about what religion is supposed to do for us versus what it actually does. And we sense that we are suffocated by these oppressive systems, and that religion is a part of that. And that the Gnostics certainly recognized this when they created their teachings on the Demiurge. And this is indeed a recognition of the existence of the idol. So the idol is the mental image of God that we create that is imperfect. There's a representation of the true God which we pour our belief into, and it turns into its own independent thought with its own volition. And then, because of the nature of that thought form, it comes to oppress us. And this happens through the oppression of authoritarian religious structures. The idol is an idea which is universal. It's something which repeats itself throughout the history of human beings in different ages and in different religions. But it is something which undoubtedly we see repeating throughout history. And in the darkened chambers of stone, they followed a new god, an artificial god made of clay, a god jealous of humanity, who convinced them it was they, not he, who arose from the dirt. Behold the idol. What is he? Not a god at all, but an abomination, a pale and pathetic reflection of the true glory of the divine, as the moon reflects the brilliant light of the sun. Yet it is he who has been called the Most High God. How can that which was made by human hands presume to be that which is eternal? The infernal golem has come alive and trudged into the holy place, defiling the sanctuary with its presence. How did this come to pass? But where is the origin of this idol? Where did it come from? If it was something that was created by us at a certain point in history, just when did that happen and how? In order to understand the origins of the idol, we need to go back to the prehistory of the human species. See, there was a time in the past where it was before agricultural civilization, or in the very early stages of agricultural civilization. Up until then, when we were much more open and free-flowing in our relationship with the divine, and with the rest of the spirit world, and with each other for that matter. Yet in this early stage of our development, we were also very ignorant. And so we couldn't recognize when the darkness was rolling in, and we allowed the darkness to overtake us. At a certain point in our history, during the agricultural revolution, a new class came to own all of the economic resources in our society. They were a class of priestly rulers. They were priests who controlled the new irrigation systems and grain stores that were created as we entered so-called civilized society. That economic power made them rulers over everybody else. And so this class were able to set themselves up as priest kings who controlled the rest of the population with an iron fist. This is the origin story of the first elites of history. And these elites came to exercise control over every facet of human life. Suddenly the people, the general population, could not determine their own destiny. They had a preordained role in this big machine that had been created with the rise of civilization. They were told what they could and couldn't do, and they were told what to believe. Of course, the elite, the priestly class who ruled, being the educated ones, would determine what was right and what was wrong. And so this new class of rulers determined our understanding of religion and spirituality. And so the rise of these elites was marked by a radical change in our religious customs, which can be observed across multiple different civilizations in multiple different parts of the world, but particularly in Mesopotamia. So suddenly we were worshipping new gods who were created in the image of the new elite. That is to say, as tyrannical figures who kept humanity in a state of servitude and who inspired obedience through fear. Not the kinds of leaders who would sacrifice themselves to the community for the benefit of the community, which is what a true noble leader should do, but the opposite of that, someone who thinks that the people need to sacrifice their own well-being so that the people in power can preserve their position and their status. And so as the priestly classes, they tried to understand the divine, they couldn't see past their own reflection, and they imagined that God was somebody just like them. And so they created an image of God, which was a reflection of their own ego, a reflection of their own being. And this is how we get these gods emerging of agricultural civilization that are like cosmic kings who enslave the human race. This type of God is the first manifestation of the idol. But every such false god, and indeed the false version of the Abrahamic God that has become so popular among religious authorities, all of these are manifestations of the core model of divinity, that of the idol, which was introduced by this revolutionary shift in religion and in society. And the creation of the idol came about by necessity. You see, this new class of priest kings, they were a small minority of the population, and they couldn't maintain control of the population with brute force alone. Even with a military at their disposal, they were vastly outnumbered by the general population. And so what they needed to maintain their control was a kind of ideology that would keep the minds of the masses enslaved. So they would not be able to rise up against their rulers because of their mental shackles. They would simply be too afraid to rise up. And this new form of belief was created around the idol as the central figure. And appropriately enough, the angels refer to this belief system as the idol religion. And once again, we see many manifestations of the idol religion throughout the history of religions. And what the idol religion essentially is it is the worship of power, as it is understood in the worldly sense. Power over other people as something which is the highest principle, the highest ordering principle of the universe. So the elites, they worship an image of their own power over other people, a tyrannical cosmic ruler, and the rest of the population are expected to submit to this god and make sacrifices in order to uphold the power of the elite. They sacrifice their own freedom, they sacrifice their own agency in order to uphold this elite at the top of society, because they are representatives of this god, and therefore there is a divine mandate to the social order. And so good and evil are reimagined as obedience and disobedience, and nothing more than that. And so the dominant social hierarchies that exist in the world are copied and then projected onto the heavenly realm, and that forms a belief system. And that belief system is the idol religion. And this form of religion, it began in the cradles of civilization, and then from there spread to the rest of the world, sometimes through trade, but predominantly through war and conquest, and eventually through colonization. The idol religion keeps us oppressed both spiritually and politically. Spiritually, because it robs us of our divine essence by denying that we are that divinity, that we are just dirt. And then it encourages us to instead project that divinity onto the idol. And then that is the thing that is the source of divinity, an external power that we need to appeal to, of course, through the chosen priesthood of that idol. But the idol religion in its various manifestations throughout history has not only kept us spiritually oppressed in this way, by denying us our true divine nature and therefore denying us the freedom of our divine nature, but it has also kept us politically and socially oppressed as well. It does this by providing the soft power basis for tyrannical forces to achieve and maintain political power. The idol religion is always wedded to authoritarian political power structures. It's dependent on them for its own existence. And that is part of the way we're able to begin to recognize various manifestations of the idol religion, which I'll go into. But I want to just touch on another interesting point with this teaching from the angels, which is that it reveals the true nature of idolatry as well. Idolatry is not just about worshipping a false god or making an image of a deity, but it is something much deeper than that. What an idol is a representation of divinity, an image of divinity, versus divinity itself. We create images of divinity, we create models of divinity, concepts of divinity, including the monotheistic God, including even more abstract versions of the divine principle, in an effort to explain that transcendent reality of the divine in terms or symbols that are familiar to us, that our mind can digest and grasp onto. Yet those who have wisdom understand that whatever ideas we have about God can be and must be imperfect representations of that ineffable divinity. That whatever God is, our ideas about God do not perfectly describe it. They merely point towards it, towards something that is beyond the grasp of our intellect. However, many people in ignorance mistake the image for the real thing, or the incomplete description for the complete and perfect description of what God is, something that we can know, some definition of God that we can be comfortable with. So, for example, such people might see the description of God as the Father, and rather than recognizing that as a metaphor, that God is that which created us, that God is that which provides structure and order in the universe, and that structure and order allows us to thrive as individuals. And in that sense, God is like a father. People take it literally. They think that there is a literal sky daddy who's sitting on a cloud somewhere, getting ready to deal out rewards and punishments based on who has or hasn't offended him. And so they take the idea of God the Father literally. This is idolatry. This is setting up an image of God and believing the image to be the real thing. This is the true essence of idolatry. The true idol is the mental image of God that we create. And instead of using that to see something beyond thought, we stop at thought, and that is the thing that we worship. We worship our own ideas about God rather than God itself. And that is the essence of what the idol is. The physical graven image that we may or may not create to give a physical expression to that idea is secondary to the mental act, which is where the true idolatry occurs. Okay, so I hope that I have given a comprehensive account of what the idol is and what the idol religion is and how they relate to the Gnostic ideas about the Demiurge. Really, the prison world that we live in is not so much the physical world as it is, but the systems of social oppression and hierarchy and arbitrary authority that we have set up in the world and now dominate our experience of the world. That is really the oppressive systems that the Demiurge presides over. So having defined all these things, how can we identify historical examples of the idol religion? How can we know what to look out for? The answer is that the idol religion is every religion in the world today, and it is at the same time none of the religions in the world today. That is because, in reality, every religion on earth contains within it two tendencies. One is to be one of the many legitimate expressions of human spirituality, one of the many true religions, true because it comes from an authentic expression of the human spiritual impulse. And although there might be differences between religions and different teachings of specific religions might have something that another religion doesn't, all of them are important in terms of shedding light on a different facet of the human spiritual experience. And that's contained within every religion. Every religion begins that way. But then there's a second tendency within every religion, and that is the tendency for that religion to morph into one of the manifestations of the idol religion. So the idol religion becomes a corruption of true spirituality. But how does this corruption occur? There is a very specific set of circumstances that causes a true religion to be degraded into the idol religion. Simply put, the religion is co-opted by authoritarian power structures, usually by a government or some other kind of political force. Religious doctrines that were meant to free people by awakening them to the spiritual nature of their being and of reality are instead reinterpreted and twisted to become a weapon for suppressing and controlling people. So what are some examples of this? Probably the most popular example is the way we had Jesus coming to challenge Roman authority, challenge the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were undoubtedly priests of the idol religion. Jesus came to challenge them, and then a few hundred years later, the Council of Nicaea comes along and creates this nice, sanitized version of Christianity, which ignores and suppresses alternative views and creates the standardized belief system with the seal of approval from the Emperor Constantine, because at this point Christianity had been co-opted and had become a tool of the Roman Empire to keep the slaves from rebelling. And the version of Christianity that was approved by the Roman political authorities that were in bed with the various bishops was going to encourage social conformity, encourage obedience to authority. And the rest is history. More recently in history, we might look at the fusion of Christianity with the politics of the Republican Party to justify pointless wars and a strongman style of leadership. But I'm not just going to pick on Christianity. We can look at all the major religions and see examples of this. You think about Islam, for example. On the one hand, you've got groups like the Sufis, this beautiful expression of spirituality, of connection to God. And then on the other hand, you've got radical Islamism, which is causing all kinds of chaos and problems all across the world. In Africa, in the Middle East, and in Europe, indeed, as well. And you know, within the Quran, there's two phases to the revelations that Muhammad receives. There's the early Mecca phase, which is where Muhammad is simply a spiritual figure and a prophet and centers around peace and the experience of God and all of that. Then the early Muslim community is exiled and goes to Medina, where Muhammad becomes a military and political figure as well. And then they return to conquer Mecca, and from Medina onwards is the Medina phase of the Quranic revelations, which tend to be a lot more warlike and a lot more violent and a lot more concerned with outward conquest. And so, as you can imagine, the Sufis would draw more on the Mecca phase of the Quranic revelations, and something like radical Islamism would draw much more on the Medina phase. But we can see there already in the early decades of Islam a tension emerging. We might think of all of the great sages and rabbis and mystics within Judaism as an authentic expression of that belief, and then look at the far-right Israeli settlers who are expelling people from their homes for just the crime of being born in the wrong place, burning down olive trees and just terrorizing people, and doing it all in the name of religious Zionism, interpreting their religion in a way which is tainted and corrupted by a modern nationalist ideology. Think about Hinduism. In Hinduism, you have the beautiful, liberating teachings of yoga and Vedanta, pointing us towards the true divine that I described earlier. Yet at the same time, there are a whole host of teachings that Brahmins give about the caste system and how that's part of the divine order and must be respected as a holy duty. And the idea of dharma, of virtue, is reinterpreted as obedience to the caste system. And you're not supposed to resent your place in the caste system. If you're born into a lower caste, you're supposed to just accept your lot in life. And if you're good and subservient, maybe you will be rewarded in the next life with a more favorable incarnation. That's a manifestation of the idol religion, a clear example of religion being used to reinforce political power. And economic power, in fact, the power of a ruling elite. Even Buddhism falls prey to this. You know, every New Age hippie's favorite religion is Buddhism. I've rejected those terrible, violent, patriarchal, Abrahamic religions, and I've become a Buddhist. But Buddhism is not immune from corruption into an idol religion either. Look at Sri Lanka. There are Buddhist monks who have aligned themselves with the Sinhalese majority government that are engaging in persecution of the ethnic and religious minority of the Tamils. And there are Buddhist monks who are going along participating in the violence. That is undoubtedly a manifestation of the idol religion. We even see it in the history of Mesoamerica, the civilizations that existed there before the Spanish conquistadors arrived, who themselves were serving another manifestation of the idol religion, because true divinity would never demand that you wipe out entire societies in order to spread God's message. So in Mesoamerica, and particularly I'm thinking of the example of the Aztecs, you had human sacrifice. But what's interesting from an anthropological standpoint, when you look at the history of the Aztec civilization, is that they had a ruling elite. And over time, this ruling elite concentrated more and more power and control of resources and control of people's lives. And as that happened, in parallel to that, the rise in power of this ruling elite, there was a corresponding rise in the frequency of human sacrifice. More people were sacrificed to the gods, the more powerful this ruling class became. That undoubtedly is a manifestation of the idol religion. And with our current ruling elite, at least in America, if not the rest of the international community, the religion of the elite has become a pure form of idolatry. It's really reached new heights of blasphemy and depravity. And we have a cult followed by the elites now where there is only the worship of power over others and the fear and the pain that you can cause to other people. There is no holiness left in their belief system at all. You know, not the one that we all have to follow, the one that they follow amongst themselves in their little secret gatherings. And so this really is the idol religion in its most extreme form. And we've only seen that a few times in history. The only other example I can think of is in the times of Elijah, when King Ahab and Queen Jezebel promoted the worship of Baal and Moloch and those kinds of gods that demanded sacrifice. Unlike the other examples of the idol religion that I've given from other religions, this is not something that can be redeemed. All of the other examples that I gave are just an incorrect understanding of a true religion, and through a process of reform and redemption, those religions can return back to being an authentic expression of human spirituality if they just stop participating in political oppression. But the cult of Moloch that the elites follow, it simply needs to be destroyed. But in the course of this teaching, we see the true dividing line for humanity. Not this religion versus that religion, but a particular interpretation of religion versus another. Another thing that the angels showed me was that the history of human religions occurs in cycles. So a new religion will arise because of some radical change that upsets social conditions, whether that's a decline or some kind of technological revolution or perhaps a combination of both. Suddenly the old forms of religion are holding humanity back because humanity is moving on, but they refuse to move on. because they just want to preserve their own power and position and traditions. And when this happens, we can't access God because we can see that the old religion has grown stale and has nothing to offer, but we don't have any other way of accessing God. And that, of course, adds to the problem, because then irreligion causes all kinds of moral problems, and things spiral even more out of control. And so in the midst of this crisis, we need a new religion or a new form of spiritual belief that can renew our relationship with God and treat the rapidly changing social conditions as an opportunity to elevate the morals of society to a new level. And so this new spiritual belief has a civilizing impact. Wherever a society is at, the new religious form of belief brings people a little bit further forward than where they previously were in their moral understanding. And eventually this new form of religion will become dominant, and at that point it becomes part of the new establishment. And it's usually at this point that the religion becomes twisted into a new manifestation of the idol religion, if indeed the society that they're in has a authoritarian power structure and a societal structure where an elite controls all of the resources and people's access to them. And so, once again, an authentic expression of true spirituality degenerates over time into an idol religion, and the cycle repeats again. And then as a new idol religion crystallizes, it is again necessary for a new spiritual impulse to come and overthrow that. And so the cycle goes on and on and on. So how do we break the cycle? Now that we have identified the idol religion, we've identified the idol and that it reproduces itself in a cyclical way through different ages and different religions, how do we break the cycle? How do we finally put the reign of the idol to an end? Here's how we do that. The first step is by reclaiming our lost divinity. Recognize that it is we who have the divine within us, and we have access to that. It's not in the idol. It's not granted to us by the idol's priesthood. We have it within, and we can reclaim it. And we need to stop believing in the idol as our God that we worship, so that we can starve it of its power, in the same way as the power of the gods in American gods dwindles when people stop believing in them. We can do the same thing with the idol. But then what? By recognizing that the idol religion keeps reproducing itself due to a set of social conditions, it then behoves us to change those conditions so that they reflect a society based on freedom, liberty, and so on, rather than oppression and tyranny and fear. In modern times, we've made efforts to establish societies that are along such lines. There's still elites and there's still systems of control, particularly in this decade, this century. But there was an attempt there, an unprecedented attempt to create free societies. And so because of that legacy, we have a better chance now than ever before to actually defeat the idol religion once and for all. If we can maintain, despite the efforts of our present-day elites in trying to tighten the noose to trap us in a control system much like the feudalism or slave societies of the past, if we can resist that and keep our free society, we have a better chance than ever before at challenging the idol religion, because we would create a new set of social conditions based on freedom and deprive the idol religion of a new opportunity to reproduce itself when new religious impulses for the new age start to arise. And so we have a moral responsibility to not only seek our own inner divine freedom, but also to challenge restrictive and oppressive power structures in the world around us. Another aspect to this as well is that by defeating the idol religion, we also lessen the influence of the demonic powers in our lives. Because of the more Manichaean characteristics of Western thought, we turn the forces of spiritual evil into something that are huge and which equally match the forces of spiritual good, but in fact, they're not. The realms of spiritual darkness are the realms of the bottom feeders, the spiritual parasites which can infest our reality, but they are very low order of beings. And in a healthy society and in a healthy psyche, we have very little to fear from them. Their presence and their ability to thrive is a mere symptom of some deeper health problem. which in this case, the health problem, our spiritual health as individuals and as a society, and when that health declines, that's when they can overtake us. The demons thrive on fear, but here's the thing. Even though the idol religion, by putting itself in place of the true religion of God, presents itself as the good, which is in conflict with the evil, the idol religion actually creates the conditions for evil to multiply because it is based on fear. Because it says, well, you're sinful, so you should feel ashamed, and you're disobedient to God, so you're going to hell. It creates that fear and darkness and negativity in which the demonic can breed. And so the shadow world that is the torment of the demons is the shadow cast by the idol. And this is ironic because it means that basically institutions like the Catholic Church, who everyone goes to when they need an exorcism, are actually creating the conditions for demonic infestation and then selling you the cure. So isn't that interesting? They convince you tarot cards are evil, you're filled with fear, and that fear becomes a portal through which the demonic can infiltrate your life. And then they're there to exorcise you. And then conversely, by creating forms of belief and spirituality that are based on love rather than fear, we deprive the demonic of an opportunity to exert its influence on us. Another thing that is important to recognize when we're thinking about the idol religion and how to identify it is that the transition of a particular religion from a true expression of religion to the idol religion doesn't involve some obvious corruption by power. They're so overcome with greed or power or whatever it is that they just want to start controlling people and they just turn into a villain. Often the transition to an idol religion in a religious organization can be quite subtle. There's some degree of conflict or struggle that is inevitable, particularly when an old order is dying and a new order is rising to replace it. And so there's some legitimate grounds for being very forceful towards those who would try and stop the truth from emerging. But it can sometimes be unclear when a line is crossed. And sometimes we go out with good intentions and then as things develop, they start to go in a different direction. And so if we're looking for an obvious warning sign that we have crossed over from legitimate spirituality into practicing the idol religion, we might miss it. We need to be ever vigilant when looking at the way that we practice religion. And we also need to recognize that although the prevailing social conditions make the reign of the idol religion possible, ultimately the root cause of the idol religion is the human ego. The idol is really an image of ourselves. We want God to have a personality that is similar to the false personality that we have adopted. That's not our divine nature. We want God to favor us and people like us above all other people. We want to be the chosen ones. And that is where the slippery slope into idolatry really begins. And so we are once again reminded that whatever changes to society are necessary to free humanity, the change needs to begin at a spiritual level, with the restoration of our relationship with true divinity, with the true God, and an inner change away from the ways of the ego as we undergo a process of repentance. And that attitude is the foundation from which all other change must come. And I think I'm going to leave it there. So that is the new teachings on the Demiurge, the nature of the idol and the idol religion. I hope you enjoyed this video. This teaching that I've given tonight and the teachings I've given in previous videos on the second coming are just a snapshot. It's just a taste of the knowledge and the wisdom that is contained within the Voces Caelesti, which I'm going to publish very soon. And I encourage you to sign up to my mailing list if you want to be informed when that book is ready for publication. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and leave a comment down below. Subscribe to my channel to support my work. And if you want to support me further, hit join or thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.